I don't even need one, really.
Figure out where that.
We're supposed to start at 10 after, so we're in good shape.
We go till 9.
So we'll start with your,
We go till 9.
yes.
Yeah, we don't have to start with that. I think that at some point it will naturally come up. Either you'll ask or somebody else will
But I
ask.
thought about starting with the fact this is an introduction to mass communication
Yeah.
class. And these are mostly freshmen.
Great.
And so maybe you could give them some idea. That's the first question I have for you. How did you decide this was the field for you? I know you got your degree.
You mean all the way back?
Yes.
Sure.
So just a short.
Yeah, it's actually a good story, and I didn't. It was a, in some ways, it was a real pivot.
Okay.
So I'm happy to talk about that.
All right. I'm so proud of my students. This is a great group of students. They are naturally motivated. 8 o'clock is tough, but
Well, this is the time to be doing this work. I think if I could pick any time to be a student in this field, it would be now.
well, that's great for you to say.
Because the disruption creates opportunity.
Right.
You know what? The barriers to entry have been obliterated, and I think anybody
Right.
in this room can create the next 2 or 5 or 10 great media businesses while they're here. They don't even
Right.
have to wait till they get out.
That's exactly right.
And you know, a long time ago, that was not the case. There was a traditional route to succeed in this business, and now it's been totally blown up,
That's right. That's absolutely
which
right.
I think is really great. I like this room.
It's a wonderful room. We have
This
several.
is Centennial. This is the name
This
of
is
the building?
Centennial. It was renovated a few years
We
back.
should do an event down here in this room. We did an event a couple years ago at the Sack and Pack room of the
Yes.
stadium, which I just thought was, I just like saying Sack and Pack. I think that's funny, and so I just, but I like actually this venue is really kind of great, and I like the size of it and the orientation of it. This is really great.
We're really pleased to have several of these around the campus. We call them teaching theaters.
How many can you fit in here?
Right at 400.
Okay, this is great. I love it.
We're still a little early, but would you like to go ahead? and
Oh,
get
go
started?
ahead. Sure. Let's just use the
All
time we have. And we have until what time?
As late as 9:10, if you'd like.
I'm good.
All right, so we'll
Yeah.
know when they have
I'm
no
good.
more
No, I'm
questions.
all right.
All right.
I'm doing a deal on the UT campus at lunch today, so this is pretty much my day today. This
Okay.
is fine.
All right.
Yep.
But you won't have as much fun over there, even
Oh,
though
hell
I'm an
no.
alumna. You won't have as much
No,
fun over there.
I like it down here better. Just don't tell them I said that.
Good morning, guys. How are you this morning? I'm glad to hear you're awake. Well, you're awake because we have an outstanding guest this morning, and I know I made you aware of that, and we're very pleased to have Evan Smith on the campus. Let me tell you a little bit about him. Evan Smith is the editor-in-chief and CEO of the Texas Tribune, a nonprofit, nonpartisan digital news organization based in Austin. The Tribune's deep coverage of Texas politics and public policy can be found at its website, texastribune.org, in the pages of the New York Times, in the newspapers, and on TV and radio stations across the state. Before co-founding the Tribune, Smith spent nearly 18 years at Texas Monthly, including 8 years as editor and a year as president and editor-in-chief. On his watch, Texas Monthly twice won the National Magazine Award for General Excellence. For 8 years, Evan hosted the Lomy Award-winning weekly interview program, Texas Monthly Talks, which aired on PBS stations statewide. He currently hosts Overheard with Evan Smith, airing on PBS nationally. New York native, he has a bachelor's degree in public policy from Hamilton College and a master's degree in journalism from Northwestern University. Guys, won't you please help me welcome Mr. Evan Smith. I'm so proud.
Lori, I really appreciate you having me back.
Thank you for being here. I'm so proud of the fact I was able to read that without my glasses and without looking old.
You did great. Well, I've had the pleasure of coming to Mac Week every year. It's as if I lost a bet with Cindy Royal, but in fact, I've done it because I love coming down to Texas State. It's a pleasure always to be with the students here.
Well, we have
Glad
a
to be
great
here.
group of students, and I know they're excited to have you here.
Sure.
So since this is the class that you're speaking in this morning, it's an
Right.
introduction to mass communications class. And the class is basically freshmen or persons who are thinking that they might be interested in majoring in mass communication.
Yeah.
So perhaps you can give us an idea about your journey to this field of mass media and how you got there,
Right.
and how they might be interested in doing so.
Well, the first thing to know is that it was accidental. If I had been a freshman in a gathering like this, I would have been thinking, this is interesting, but I'm going into politics, not journalism. My intention had all along been to go into politics, to work in politics, maybe to run for office one day, but I never even gave a thought to journalism or to communications. And as an illustration of that, the junior year of my undergraduate experience, the specific place I went to college, not everybody, but nearly, let's just say nearly everybody, that's probably an exaggeration also, but a lot of people in my class traveled away for either one semester or for a full year to study off campus. So my roommate for 2 years, for instance, went to study architecture in Florence, in Italy. And I had friends who went to Spain, I had friends who went to England. And I chose, given the opportunity to travel around the world, I chose to go to Washington, D.C., and work half the semester of my first semester of my junior year in Congress for a congressman from Minnesota, and the second half in the Federal Election Commission, which I want to tell you is not something I would recommend to anybody. Horribly boring. It just was soul-sucking experience for the second half of that first semester. But in any case, I went to Washington thinking, this is what I'm going to do when I get out of college. Let's go do this while the opportunity presents itself as a student. It will surely be great, and it will affirm my decision to go into politics. And in fact, it had, as it often does in a case like that, it had the opposite effect. I got there and I found the whole experience of working in Washington just to be mind-numbing and depressing. And by about halfway through that first semester, I had this nagging feeling that I had made a terrible mistake. And so by the time I got back to campus after that first semester in Washington, the only thing I knew for sure was that the entire career path I had predicted for myself and the entire academic track that I've been on was completely wrong. And I had a year and a half to undo it. And so I came back really kind of lost academically and lost in terms of what I was going to do when I got out of school. And I met on that trip on that semester away, another student on that semester away was a woman I really didn't know very well, who was the incoming editor of the school paper, which it's a small Hamilton College in upstate New York, roughly the size of, say, Trinity in San Antonio or Austin College in Sherman. It's a very small school, liberal arts. And at the time, I imagine it's still the case today, did not have a daily college paper. It had a weekly paper. I mean, it was just the lamest possible thing you could imagine. But no journalism program. It was liberal arts oriented, so none of that specific stuff. And so she was the incoming editor of the paper, and she and I were talking about this position I was in of having kind of the bottom had dropped out of everything academically. And she said, you know, why don't you just write a column for the paper about politics? Because you still have this interest in politics, but you don't want to do this professionally. Just sort of do this while you're kicking around in the dirt trying to figure out what you're going to do. So I thought, okay, I'd never ever considered doing that before, but I thought that's fine. I was a minor in English. I could write well enough, and so I thought I'll just do that. And so I started to write a column for the school newspaper as a second semester junior about politics, and it just took. And so I had this revelation about halfway through my spring semester as a junior. I thought, well, okay, this. I mean, it's really as simple as that. And then, so as a senior in college, I ended up classes that pointed me more in the direction of writing about rather than working in politics, and then made the decision to apply to graduate school in journalism simply because coming out of a liberal arts background and having not really thought about journalism except for the last year and a half or so, I thought I probably need a little bit more academic background in this and so went to Northwestern's journalism school. Turned out to be a great choice, and then I was off to the races. But literally, as a freshman or as a sophomore, if you had asked me what I was going to do, I had absolutely no sense this was going to be the profession I'd end up in, and it's now been, 27 years. Yeah.
Well, by the way, guys, we have a microphone set up there for you. And we're going to be taking some questions from the audience. But before we do that, we've talked about the Texas Tribune.
Yeah.
Perhaps you'd like to share with them a little bit more information about the Tribune?
Sure. So I don't make the assumption even after 5 years, and it is almost 5 years. In fact, 2 weeks from yesterday will be the 5th anniversary of the first day that the Tribune was online. I don't make any assumptions even after 5 years that people know what we're doing. More people happily know what we're doing without my having to explain it today than was the case, a year ago or certainly 5 years ago. But we launched the Tribune November 3rd of 2009. By we, I mean 17 of us. There were 17 people on staff on day one, 11 reporters out of 17 full-time staff. Today, we are, depending upon how you do the math, somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 full-time. If you do a conservative definition of reporter, we have 15 reporters. If you do a less conservative definition, which is the one that I frankly use, we have 26. Because I count everybody who creates content. The traditional definition of reporter is somebody who is a reporter. But I count the design people, I count the technology people, anybody who gets a byline on the work that we produce, I consider to be somebody who creates content, and therefore by the new definition of reporter or journalist, I consider that person to be a journalist. And I think the definition of reporter or journalist has definitely expanded. It's as elastic today as it's ever been, which I think creates opportunities for people like people in this room. But we, by any measure, have according to the Pew Research Center, which did a study this last summer, we have the most reporters, 15 or 26, however you calculate it, covering a state capital of any news organization, for-profit or non-profit, in the entire country. So we have more reporters covering the Capitol in Austin than the New York Times has covering the state capitol in Albany. We have more reporters covering the Capitol here than the LA Times does covering the Capitol in Sacramento. And the reason we started the Tribune 5 years ago was that the coverage of public policy and politics and state government in Texas was in deep decline over the previous 5, 10, 20 years. I came to Texas to work for Texas Monthly initially in 1991. And when I did, there were still, and this is in 91, there were still 2 daily newspapers in Dallas competing, still 2 papers in Houston, still 2 papers in San Antonio, still 2 papers in El Paso. If you went back to 1987, not very long before 1991, there were still 2 papers in Fort Worth. There were many more newspapers, many more news organizations, many more reporters covering this stuff than there were when we started the Tribune in 2009. We started the Tribune directly in response to the decline in coverage of public policy and politics. Now, you may say, anybody may say, well, that stuff is boring, and nobody really wants to read about that stuff. And so if you're in the news business and you're making a commercial decision, between, let's say, high school and college sports or politics, or features, entertainment journalism, and politics, you'd pick the stuff that people want to read. And I grant you there is a wider audience for sports or for other stuff. But that doesn't make the coverage of politics. The reality is that we all are affected by every decision that gets made at the Capitol in Austin. Public education, I don't have to tell people here that the policies set on higher education that relate to tuition regulation, just that one issue alone, everybody in this room is affected by the cost of higher ed. Immigration, in a state like Texas where the population is growing quickly and changing dynamically, we'll soon be a Hispanic majority state, that will transform Texas, it's already transforming Texas. Immigration is obviously an issue that affects everybody in Texas. Transportation, I drove here on I-35 from Austin to get to San Marcos to speak to you all today, and the fact is that the roads we have are not good enough and we don't have enough of them, right? Water, we're running out of water in a state where the population is growing fast. On and on, every single issue that you could name that is decided in some measure by the people we elect to serve at the state legislature. They pass laws, they spend tax dollars, they set policies. Those policies affect everybody in this room, everybody outside this room. Everybody is impacted by the work that gets done at the Capitol in Austin. I know it's hard to get people to pay attention. We have the worst voter turnout, or among the worst voter turnout of any state in the whole country. This has been a problem for a long time. It's not a problem that developed overnight. It's not going to a problem that's going to be solved overnight. But we made the calculation, a bunch of us in '09, that through journalism, we could try to educate and engage more people, get more people to pay attention to the issues that affect us all in the state of Texas. So for us, the first decision was to create a news organization dedicated just to those things: public policy, politics, and state government. And one great thing about the 5 years we've been doing this is we've had absolutely no mission creep, no divergence from that idea. We haven't decided, oh, we need to get more people to read our stuff, and so we're going to start doing things outside those three categories. We are just doing those things and those things alone. That's the first thing. Second thing is, we were absolutely committed then and are committed even more now to being nonpartisan. There are plenty of places to go to have your own personal point of view reaffirmed. You know, if you go on cable television, you may be an MSNBC person, you may be a Fox person. If you go on satellite radio, there are any number of channels to reaffirm your own point of view on the world. The problem is that people need reliable information that doesn't have bias baked into it, or doesn't have some skew that they can then use to be more thoughtful and productive citizens. Ultimately, what that kind of journalism does, nonpartisan journalism ideally, is it gives you basic facts that you process and then you use to make a decision about how you think about issues or think about the world. And I think we've gotten away to a large degree from unfiltered, unbiased information. And so we were very committed to just playing it down the middle. No endorsements of candidates, no editorializing on issues, no thumbs on the scale. And that was the case back when we started, and it's absolutely still the case 5 years later. And then the last and most important thing is we made the decision to be nonprofit. The for-profit media do as good a job as they possibly can under very difficult circumstances these days. The environment for media businesses on the for-profit side is challenging. Advertising dollars have migrated out of the newspaper or out of print and off broadcast and onto the internet, which is cheaper and more efficient in some ways for them to reach the people they want to reach. Classified advertising long ago migrated out of the pages of newspapers and has never returned. And the fact is, circulation at newspapers is also down significantly. And so every way that the traditional for-profit news media make money, every single way is diminished from what it was 5 or 10 or 20 years ago. We believe that the kind of journalism that we do, that educates the public, that makes people better citizens, is a public good. It's journalism in the public interest. It strengthens democracy. I mean, if you want to go all the way down the corny spectrum here, our job is to get people to participate in this participatory democracy of ours by giving them better information that they can in turn use to be more thoughtful citizens, to be motivated to participate, to write their congressman or member of the legislature, to take a position on an issue and marshal the support of their community in support of that idea. To vote. I mean, just voting. If more people would just vote, the simple act of voting would be an improvement over where we stand right now. And a lot of people in this state feel like they cannot vote, but then complain about the outcome of elections. Let me explain to you how this works. If you don't bother to vote, which is as close to a passive act as you could possibly take, then you forfeit the right to complain about the results. We're about to elect for the first time in half a generation an entirely new cast of characters, not an unfamiliar cast of characters, but an entirely new cast of characters to every top state office. We're going to have a new governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, controller, land commissioner, agriculture commissioner. We're going to have a new railroad commissioner, one of 3. These will all be new people in these offices, not unfamiliar, but new. We're overturning the mulch of state government, basically, right, with this election cycle. And the impact of these new people being elected is going to be incalculable on your lives, the lives of the people in this room, for good or not good. The impact of those new people in those offices will be extraordinary. And yet, a lot of people go, yeah, I don't really care, or I don't think I need to vote, or what they're going to do is not going to have an impact on my life, so why should I bother to take the time to vote? The reality is that it has an enormous impact on your lives and on the lives of the 26.5 million people in total who live in Texas. And so from our perspective, we're not activists on behalf of one position or another, one party or another, one ideology or another. We are activists on behalf of Texas. We don't want to tell people what to think. Unfortunately, we have to tell people to think. And so the journalism that we produce, we think is a public good, and therefore we went and got a designation from the IRS that allowed us to raise money as a nonprofit. And so we have, could you put the slide up that I showed you? We have in 5 years' time, from individuals, foundations, and corporations, raised almost $27 million as a nonprofit. And, you know, it's a model that outside of the public broadcasting side of public media, radio and television, PBS and NPR, has not really been tried, or not been tried very much. And we certainly had no reason to think that it would succeed. There was a lot of arrogance baked into the decision to start the Tribune, and there was even more arrogance baked into the idea that we asserted rather than were able to prove at the beginning that we could raise enough money to do this. But we've made a go of this, and it's a sustainable economic model, at least for now. And you know, we have a lot of different revenue sources that have allowed us to make this work. And you know, I'm happy to talk about that in more detail. But the reality of this, I think, is we started this nonprofit, nonpartisan, and just covering these things, and it's been a great deal.
Do we have any questions? Please come to the microphone here if you can. You can make your way to the microphone if you know you have a question. That would be ideal.
Yes, ma'am.
I know you briefly touched on it, calling the Tribune nonprofit, but I know Dr. Fluker mentioned you used to work in public broadcasting at PBS. I was wondering if there's anything that you took from working in public broadcasting that's really important to how you run the Tribune.
Well, thank you for your question. Let me clarify. I've never actually worked at PBS. I host a program that airs on PBS stations around the country. And I actually am on the national PBS board. But my relationship to PBS is more as a volunteer rather than as somebody who's been an employee. But certainly I've been around PBS, and for that matter, NPR stations for a long time. We have a great relationship with the NPR stations in Austin and Dallas. We collaborate with them a lot on things. And so I do have a sense of where the opportunity exists within that public broadcasting world. You know, PBS stations, a lot of people think about PBS these days and they think of Downton Abbey, right? The fact is that baked into the mission of PBS is really an educational function. PBS sees itself as an educator of sorts. And the NewsHour, which Jim Lehrer hosted for many years, and before that it was Jim Lehrer and Robin McNeil, now it's Judy Woodruff and Gwen Ifill, is really, I think, the best newscast that's on television, on any station, on the over-the-air stations or on cable, because it's very much just down the middle. It just tells you what happened over the course of the day. It's thoughtful. I think we can learn from a dispassionate, which is not to say not energetic, but just, you know, kind of down the middle. Here's what happened today. Here are the facts. Here are the key people at the center of the things that happened over the course of a day or a week or a month. Here are the things you should talk about. We're all very busy. You know, we all have very busy lives. And what newspapers used to do in their heyday was tee up for all of us in our busy lives the 2 or 3 or 4 things that we needed to be thinking about and talking about around the dinner table or the water cooler or the gym locker room, you know. And that function has largely gone away, or has gone away to a degree, less than it used to be. And I think that the PBS stations, through the NewsHour and through some of the really great documentary programming that they do, the series Frontline and Nova, I think they do an amazing job of illuminating these big issues in long form and give us a lot to think about. So I take that away from PBS. I think NPR is a little bit different. I think the NPR newscasts in the morning edition, and in the afternoon, all things considered, and many of the programs on the NPR stations do a similarly good job of sticking to mostly serious topics and trying to give them, you know, longer form treatment. I think you get a lot from those, from both the PBS and the NPR stations. And I think we stand on their shoulders. You know, their success over many, many years created a place for an organization like ours to exist. And we work closely with those stations. You know, I think they do a pretty good job also of staying down the middle. Now, NPR stations, more than PBS stations, get dinged by people who don't like them for being liberal or being biased. you know, I could do an hour for you on why I think the charges of bias against the media are illegitimate. Basically, I think if you don't like something that the media reports, then it's biased. But if that same organization were to turn around and report it from the opposite perspective, one that you agreed with, you probably wouldn't be complaining about bias then. And I think it's too easy to ding NPR for being biased when mostly just people don't like what they say or don't like what they do. I think they do a pretty good job of steering away from taking one side or another. So I think we've learned a lot about serious treatment of issues from them.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi, my name is, oh, sorry.
That's okay.
My name is Connor. I'm a journalism major with a minor in political science, so
Great.
this subject definitely piques my interest.
Yeah.
I was wondering if there are any internships opportunities available.
As if I asked her to ask that question. So we have a terrific internship program at the Tribune that has now been going for 5 years, although what will interest you is for the last year it has become a paid internship program. I've gotten some of your attention probably with that. It's always been a really good program because we don't believe in the kind of internship programs in which you kind of sit around and do nothing, or worse, where you sit around and do clerical and meaningless work. There's too much work to be done for us to have smart kids like kids in this room come up and work for us to not put them to work. So any of our interns over the 5 years would tell you that within the first day or two that they were working for us, they were out reporting stories and producing publishable work. Because of our relationship with the New York Times, one of the great things about being an intern at the Tribune is that you leave your internship, whether it's the 9-month internship, September to May, or the summer internship, which is a 3-month internship, June through August. You leave typically with 5 to 10 published clips from the New York Times. You know, when I was in your situation and I was, you know, trying to get an internship when I was at a college journalism or communications program, if you told me that I would have gotten within 1,000 feet of the New York Times building, that would have been enough. So the idea that as an intern, as a 19 or 20 or 21-year-old, you might be able to do work that is published in the New York Times with your name on it is kind of an amazing, I think, an amazing opportunity. And as part of your internship at the Tribune, you get to do that. But really what you do is you really report alongside our reporters. You're treated as an equal, and you get very rigorous mentoring and editing by the veteran journalists there. And, you know, typically you'll gravitate to a subject that interests you or an area of expertise maybe that you have academically, but it also may be that you work as a general assignment reporter and we just throw you in as things come up. And I think the best argument in favor of being an intern at the Tribune would be made by the interns who've come through. And we've had a number of really wonderful interns from Texas State over time. You know, we don't show favoritism to the UT Austin students just because they're close by. I realize it's a little more onerous for kids who go to Texas State to get back and forth to Austin, but we love having Texas State students, and over the years, some of our very best interns have been from this university. So I would say if you're inclined to do an internship September to May, which would be a 9-month internship, and I'll explain in a second why we think that's a good length of internship, or if you want to do one over the summer, this is the perfect time to apply. And there's information about our internship program on our website. Corey McClagan, who is our news editor, is the intern coordinator. She vets all the resumes for internships, and she ultimately, with a group of people, makes a decision about which interns we bring aboard. We typically have between 3 and 5 interns at any given time. Now, the 9-month internship developed over the last couple of years because we realized that you bring in an intern and they kind of have to get their feet under them and figure out how everything works. And you mentor them for a while and they kind of improve gradually and produce more and more publishable work. And then the 3 months is up all of a sudden, and then you got to send them back to school. And just at the moment when the interns are in the absolute best position to be doing great work, internship is over. And so we said that's kind of bad for them and bad for us. So rather than the summer has to be a 3-month internship, because over the summer we get a lot of kids who go to school out of state and couldn't intern for us over the school year. But during the school year, we said, why don't we make it a 9-month internship so they start in September. Typically, you'd say at the end of November, see you, go back to school. No, we're going to have them stick around until May. So after that initial 3 months of getting indoctrinated and getting their feet under them, then they stick around for another 6 months and they're producing amazing work. The other great thing about our internship program, I think, is that we've hired a bunch of interns to be reporters on the staff. A bunch of people who work for us started as interns. So I want to encourage you and anybody else to consider applying to be an intern with us. And if you don't get an internship the first time, apply again. And we'd be very happy to consider you.
Thank you.
I needed to say that, so thank you for asking it. I wasn't going to leave without saying that. You made it easy, sir.
Hey, Colton Gableman, and I just wanted to thank you again real quick for coming to speak with us today.
Sure.
I'd shake your hand, but you're all the way over there.
Don't worry about it.
It's pretty common knowledge that jobs in the field of journalism are trending downwards these days. What advice would you give to a journalist hopeful that is in this job market?
First thing, I'll very respectfully challenge the proposition. I don't know that I think these days that this is a down job market for journalists. I mean, I understand that the conventional wisdom about the media business is, well, this is not a great time to go into journalism and newspapers are not hiring and this, that, and the other piece. I get that. But I actually think, I was saying to Laurie before we started today, that I think this is actually the very best time that I could imagine to be doing what you're doing. The most optimistic and hopeful time to be going into journalism that I could imagine. I think that you are in, all things considered, a better position today in school and coming out of school to look for a job than I was 25 or 30 years ago, starting out myself, for this simple reason. The world of journalism has blown up. And because it's blown up, because of all this disruption, there are opportunities that never would have existed before. Now, you need to be self-directed and self-motivated. You've got to have vision for what the world that you want to enter looks like. But I don't think that the down job market in the traditional media is necessarily the end of the conversation. I think it's the beginning of the conversation. I think there are all kinds of opportunities that outside of the traditional set of big city, mid-size, small-town newspapers or mid-market, small-market TV stations, the kind of things that you would typically do coming out of a program like this. There are so many more kinds of media that exist today than existed 5 years ago. There are so many more opportunities because of technology. The barriers to entry to journalism, to communications, to the media have really been obliterated by the disruption of the last 5 years, by the easy and cheap access to technology. There are people starting media companies, media businesses, media properties of all kinds. And I just think you have to be smart about where you want to be and what you want to do and where you look to do it. And I think that the kind of skills that you're learning today in a program like this are enormously valuable, let me tell you, as an employer. Somebody who hires people, you all are basically Swiss Army knives. I've said this at NAC Week before. You all have an enormous number of skills coming out of a program like this that are just baked into the curriculum. A lot of you in this room will be able to shoot video and edit it in a basic but still meaningful way. Certainly in my generation of journalism education, couldn't do it. You all have, of course, to record audio probably 15 different ways and edit it and produce something. Many of you probably have basic programming skills, which I think is an amazing asset to have. You presumably can write coming out of a program like this, and you presumably have the kind of judgment about what is and is not a story worth telling. And you probably have, in addition to the ways I named, a number of other ways I didn't name, to tell stories that are just different than the ways that stories have traditionally been told. You have, in Swiss Army knife sense, you have a screwdriver and a toothpick and a corkscrew that can be, you have all these skills that can be deployed at a moment's notice because of the kind of education you've received at Texas State. And you know what? You may not need to deploy the toothpick more than once a year, but if you need it, it's there, right? Coming out of a program like this one and going into the world of work, having that set of skills, being able to do a lot of different things is not only enormously valuable, it's a requirement. I don't hire people. We, in the business I'm in, do not hire people who can't do a little bit of everything these days, because you need people who can do everything.
So basically, if you have any skills that could be relevant, just list them, like. in
Well,
your
I'd say
hot
that
pajamas.
I would say that the resumes that catch my eye demonstrate basic competency in a lot of the things I've just named. These days, I'm particularly interested in people who have basic HTML programming abilities, not super deep computer science training, but I want to see the kind of kids coming out of a communication school who can sit down and create things, not just report a story, but I want to see somebody who can really produce journalism kind of in its entirety. And you're not an independent actor at any entity. You've always got people around you who are going to work with you and help you and over you. But we're hiring, for instance, right now for a couple of positions on our news apps team, data journalism team. And I know there's a lot of emphasis on training data journalism and news apps students here. And the resumes of the students who are of former students, but of applicants coming through, are really quite interesting because they have a totally different orientation than they might have even had 5 years ago. They have some design background. Of course, I can do some programming, or, I mean, it's just a very different kind of mix of skills. And I just think the more things you can offer to an employer and the more things that you can demonstrate on a resume, the more attractive you're going to be. If you want to just be a writer, I want to just write. I don't want to do any of this other stuff. I want to be a writer. My advice to you would be build a time machine and go back to 1960. Because that's probably the last time that people were in the business of hiring writers. Today, it's about a lot of things. And I think the job market is probably more favorable to you than you think.
Thank you.
Sure. Hello.
Hi there, my name is Megan Moore.
Okay.
You mentioned roadways here in Texas, and with early voting starting yesterday, I
Yes.
just wanted to hear what you had to say about Proposition 1.
So you're referring to the constitutional referendum on the funds that would be removed from the rainy day fund to support, it's about $1 billion blank. I mean, I lost track of exactly what the number is. I don't have a position on anything because I'm a journalist. Nice try. But I'll make a general observation. We are adding 1,000 people to the population of Texas a day. We brag about that. Our current governor runs around the country pickpocketing businesses and employees from other states. We brag about that. We're adding 150 people a day to Austin. Those people are not bringing health care with them. They're not bringing public education with them. They're not bringing water with them. They're not bringing asphalt with them. We have a finite number of physical and social infrastructure resources in this state. And for all the benefits of the economic boom that the state has enjoyed and the economic boom that carried us through the recession better than other states, the fact is we are perilously close to being victims of our own success. If you drive around the areas that have been truly transformed by the shale boom in Texas, the Eagle Ford, Southeast Texas, or out in the Permian Basin, there's no question that those communities are enjoying enormous economic benefit. The example that's always held up for me is Karnes City. Anybody in here know where Karnes City, Texas is? Town about 3,600. 1,200 of the 3,600, 1/3 of the citizens, are now millionaires as a result of the Eagle Ford. Average net worth is $6 million. They've created something like 90 millionaires in the last 6 weeks in Karnes City. But the roads are totally torn up by all this heavy truck traffic, and they're using water for this extraction of minerals, resources, that is, questionable as to whether it's having an overall impact on the region's already difficult time with water. There's air pollution as a result of all this activity. I mean, it really is a case where there's enormous benefit, but then there's an underside to the benefit that we hear less about. So to come back to your question, we have a terrible problem with roads in this state. That when the water ballot initiative passed last November, it was said that it was a 50-year water plan at an estimated cost of $53 billion. And the amount of money taken out of the rainy day fund for the water ballot initiative was only about $2 billion. But it was a revolving loan fund, so money would be lent out, projects would get online, then they would give the money back, and it would have this reverberating effect. This is said to be on the transportation side that over 20 years we may need as much as $400 billion. So it just makes the water deal pale by comparison. The amount of money that's being put out of the rainy day fund toward the transportation plan is only about a quarter of what the state needs just to do maintenance on existing roads. So we have a problem that's not going to be solved by this ballot initiative, but it's going to be a hell of a lot worse if it doesn't pass.
Okay.
So while I'm not in the business of advocating for one side or another, anybody who drives to this campus from any place other than 1 second from this campus understands the situation that we're in from a transportation standpoint.
Thank you. That's
Sure.
what I wanted to hear.
Great. Hi.
Hello, my name is Ariel Vassell. I was just wondering what really inspired you to start the Tribune. You probably answered it before I came. I came in a little late.
Well, what inspired me is looking around the state and realizing that a lot of people in a lot of communities have absolutely no idea that we're fighting over funding of public education at the Capitol, or that the change of the population of Texas to what will soon be Hispanic majority is going to have an enormous impact on the future of the state, that we have extraordinary opportunities in higher ed, but we're not creating enough access points for students, and there's a question, a legitimate question about the affordability of higher ed for those students who can manage to get a spot at a university like this. If you go down the list of issues, I love Texas. This is a great place to live, but I'd be lying if I said that there were not a whole bunch of areas that everybody in the state needs to be thinking about a lot harder and working on. It doesn't make you hate Texas to acknowledge that there's a whole bunch of challenges that we're not doing a terribly good job of addressing as a state. And so my belief was that if I believe that I want the Texas of my children's lives to be better than the one that I've experienced, then I think we have a lot of work to do. And I thought that journalism was one way that you could educate people about the issues that are not being addressed adequately. And hopefully people would take up their pitchforks and torches and storm the Capitol and tell people in elective office that we got to get to work on this stuff. Now, the other point I'll make is structurally, the political system in the state creates no incentive for people to participate or pay attention. Redistricting has made almost every election in Texas not competitive. As I sit here, we're going to have 230 odd elections 2 weeks from today. 150 Texas House races, about half, 15 of 31 Texas senators, 36 members of Congress, certain number of statewide elected officials. In all but about 5 of those races, I can tell you right now with a certainty who's going to win. Why would anybody bother to vote if they know that the outcome is already decided? The game is rigged. And so people can be forgiven for not participating, although I hate it. No change comes if you don't participate, one side or the other. And if I travel around, as I do, to small communities in the state where there haven't been competitive elections for years, and I ask people on the street, who is your state representative? They don't even know who the state representative is or who their member of Congress is. And I just think that's terrible. And that's the building block. That's the first building block of people being engaged, is just to even know who represents you. Because if you don't know that person, then you're never going to write to that person and say, do this, don't do this. You're never going to vote. So I think the system is in some respects screwed up. And that was probably an inspiration too.
Yeah. And I have another question.
All right.
Why'd you start in Austin, and do you plan to move the Tribune to more cities, different cities?
Well, it's a statewide organization, so in some respects it is in every city. We just happen to be based in Austin because you have to be based someplace.
Yeah.
It's the city with the state capital. It's the center of government. It makes the most sense, I think, to do it there.
Mhm.
So I think Austin is the right place for us to be.
Awesome. Thank
Yeah,
you.
sure. Sir.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Borzjani, and I would like to thank you for coming out and talking to us today.
No problem.
One question I have, you talked about how digital is taking off. I was wondering if at some point you think the Tribune will stop printing altogether, as some traditionally print organizations have.
Yeah.
Or if it will, and it will just completely.
Well, we don't have a print edition, so it's easy for us to stop printing since we haven't started.
Oh,
Yeah. It's entirely online.
okay.
Although we give our content away to traditional news organizations, and it does run in newspapers. It runs in papers all over the state. We give it away for free because we believe that if you live in a city that doesn't have coverage of the Capitol, you are still every bit as much a Texan as those of us in the big cities. I mean, that's the part that I find most maddening. You have 5 million paid newspaper readers in Texas. 5 million. Population is 26.5 million. 5 million paid newspaper readers. Half of those, 2.5 million, are in the 5 big cities: Austin, San Antonio, Fort Worth, Dallas, Houston. Those are also, coincidentally, the 5 cities that have dedicated reporters at the Capitol. Now, is that exactly true? No. El Paso has 1 person. Lubbock, Amarillo together have 1 person. But basically, that's the case. So in the bottom half, in the 2.5 million at the bottom, outside the 5 big cities, basically they're relying on the Associated Press, for which these newspapers have to pay $2 a circulation head, hostage prices, to get their coverage. Or they've got nothing. And I'm telling you what, if you read the newspapers around the state that are outside the 5 big cities, it is basically nothing. And so we give our content away to everybody, but in particular with a focus on those papers that don't have coverage of their own, because we think the people in those communities, that somebody in Canyon or in Alpine or in Donna or in Orange, those people have as much of a stake in the outcome of the fight over public education funding as the people in Austin, San Antonio, Fort Worth, Houston do. What they don't have is access to the same level of information about it. We don't think that's a good thing. They're every bit as somebody in Orange is the same amount a Texan as you, or as me, or as Laurie. That person has the same stake in the outcome of these fights as somebody in the big cities, but they don't have access to the same information. That is not equal. And we want to try to make it a little bit more equal by providing that content to those papers.
Thanks so much.
Sure. Hello.
Hi, my name is Lydia Watts, and I was just wondering what essential skills or qualities are necessary to work in journalism?
Well, as I said earlier, I think it's good to have the ability to record and edit audio, to shoot and edit video, to do basic programming. I think those things today are absolutely attractive and may in fact have risen to the point of being essential skills. I think that the basic thing, so to take all the skills off the table, you have to have the desire to tell a story and the ability to tell it well. There is no one right way to tell a story. In the old days, journalism schools taught an inverted pyramid, or they taught, here's how you write a lead. And it was as if it was all kind of cookie cutter. And the fact is, the best journalism is not the traditional, conventional journalism. The best journalism is out-of-the-box storytelling that is captivating, not because it's like everything else, but precisely because it's not like everything else. I think to the degree that we squelch as a profession or as an academic discipline that tendency to try to tell stories in a new and interesting and different way, we harm the future of the work we do. So I think it begins with, do you have a story to tell? Do you have a motivation to tell it? And do you have a creative and interesting way to tell it that maybe is different and more compelling than the ways that everybody else tells it? We ought to be encouraging that.
Thank you for coming.
Sure. Hi.
Hi, Evan. John Zmickley, faculty member here. And we have another faculty member that's watching the live stream, Cindy Royal. She has a question about the future of journalism and how it relates to data journalism. If you could talk about that, and then also what kind of skills students need to succeed in the world of data journalism.
Well, we've put a lot of emphasis on data journalism from the very beginning. We believe that we're not trying to give people news exclusively. We're trying to give them knowledge. Not just news, but knowledge. We're trying to make them smarter. And one of the ways you make people smarter is by giving them information that they can process themselves and form conclusions about without the filter of the Tribune or any other news organization telling them what to think. Data journalism, I think, has now become, it's the shiny object for a lot of news organizations these days. And so everyone's hiring data journalists, everyone's hiring database managers, all good. The fact is, data journalism is a really interesting way into the profession. You may not be the best writer in the world, but you may have really interesting ideas about how to go get, clean up, and present big sets of public information that are in turn every bit as journalistic in what they accomplish as a conventional news story is. I think you could be a data journalist without any particular academic training or background. We have people who've come through the front door as liberal arts people. We've had people who've come through as computer science people. We've had people who come through the front door as design people. As I said, we're hiring a couple of people in data journalism right now, and we had a graduate of the Rhode Island School of Design come through yesterday who seemed like a very good candidate. Her background was primarily in presentation of data visualizations, which I think is a great and underappreciated skill. So I think it's just another vertical. It's another opportunity for somebody who comes in the door to say, well, there's a place for, I mean, to the question I had earlier about, you know, isn't this a bad time to look for a job in journalism? No. There are more of these areas of journalism developing and more specialties that are developing that you can gravitate toward. I think data journalism is not only something that I'm pleased that the Tribune is doing. I don't think we would be where we are today, maybe even be in business today, without it. Tell Cindy hi for me.
I think you just did.
Okay, good. Hi, Cindy.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Joshua Truxa, Journalism Junior. When you were talking about other the coverage of other state capitals, you mentioned like the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times. To your knowledge, is there any other news organization in the country, such as in another state, that specializes in the coverage of a state capital and state politics the way that you do?
Well, look, I'm not going to say no, because the minute I do, somebody will pop up and say, aha, there's this thing. I can tell you that I've been paying very careful attention to this stuff for the last 5 years. There's not another organization doing what we're doing on the scale that we're doing. I think you've got some folks who are going at this on a smaller scale, and I think on a smaller scale it's fine. You know, the Tribune's model is the Tribune's model. It works for us. We've built this thing the way we've built it. I don't presume that anybody else might want to build it this way, or that it would necessarily suit another state capital, because Texas is different in a lot of ways. There are opportunities that Texas presents on the funding side. I mean, and let's be honest, on the content side. You know, pardon my slightly bad language here. I often am moved to remind people, this shit practically writes itself, right? I mean, you know, you look at the material that we have to work with. It's Christmas every day. And a lot of places are not nearly as interesting as this. I mean, you know, the God I worship is not good enough to me to give me both Rick Perry and Ted Cruz running for president at the same time. I mean, I'm hoping. I mean, we have an enormous amount of material. And I don't know that, you know, I mean, not that I want to knock anybody from the great state of Idaho, but I'm not sure the Idaho Tribune would be inherently as interesting. I mean, they do have a governor named Butch, but beyond that, you know, I don't know that the Idaho Tribune would be as interesting as the Texas Tribune. Now, we also have advantages on the funding side. We have more Fortune 1000 companies than I think almost every other state. We have more millionaires and billionaires, I know for sure. We had 41 billionaires on the Forbes 400, and that's just the ones we know about. I mean, the fact is, if you're going to fund an organization through contributions from wealthy individuals, foundations, and corporations, you could do a lot worse than being in Texas. And I think that in other states, the same pool of wealth to draw from to fund a nonprofit like this one may not exist, or to the same degree. But are there people trying to make a go of this elsewhere? Sure. In a lot of cases, there are people who came through us, through our office, I should say, or through Austin, to kick our tires and to say, well, how did you all do this? What are you doing? And how can we take the best practices from what you've learned over 5 years and apply them to our own situation? So I do think people are trying it, and I encourage anybody to go out and do this. I had somebody just last night who I hadn't talked to in a very long time, but who I worked with my first job out of graduate school in Knoxville, Tennessee, has become over the last number of years, the editor of the alternative weekly, kind of the Austin Chronicle of Knoxville, Tennessee. And I read in the last week, I did actually see this, that they were shutting this newspaper down. There's one newspaper in the city of Knoxville, the Knoxville News Sentinel, and the Metro Pulse was the name of this paper, was shutting down. And he wrote me last night through Facebook Messenger and said, okay, I want to now restart this as a nonprofit. How do I do it? I get calls like that about one a week. Always happy to talk to people who want to try to make this work. I do think it's possible. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have one second question.
Sure.
There was a lady up here that was asking about I think it was the Proposition 1.
Yep.
And you talked about the rigging of the, are you saying, you saying that the state government has gerrymandered the districts? And what, I've heard some suggestion that there should be a third party that does the districting.
Well,
And what have you seen in that? I'm not asking you to take a position, but I'm asking.
well,
your observation.
I'll go a little deeper on this, which is to say that I think that this is not about one side Democrats or another side Republicans necessarily rigging it. I think that the system, redistricting protects people who have a stake in having their situations protected, right? So if you redistrict, you do so to keep a party, whichever party it is, in the most enviable position in an election, so that general elections are no longer really relevant. Now, there is some competition in primaries these days. You know, the outer edge of a party on either side might challenge somebody who's more toward the center, but general elections these days in Texas are just basically non-existent. I think that what's happened is the political system is broken. And I think there's frankly, I don't think this is a controversial position. I think there's general agreement about this.
My question is, though, I've heard the suggestion that the proposal that there should be a third party that comes in and does the districting. Have you seen?
Yeah, the idea, Kel Seliger, who is the state senator from Amarillo, who is the chair of the Senate Redistricting Committee last session or the session before, was asked this question at an event that we had, and he said, taking the politics out of redistricting is like taking the calories out of fried chicken. You cannot do it. There are too many people in the political system who are invested in just this kind of elimination of competition. The fact is, everybody talks about a third party, but at the end of the day, a third party doesn't get traction. It's in the interest of the first two parties to block the success of a third party. And it's expensive to mount a serious third party campaign or challenge. At the presidential level, 1980 and 1992 were the two elections: John Anderson against Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, Ross Perot against George Bush and Bill Clinton.
Well, when I say third party, I don't mean as in third party. I should clarify. I mean not like a nonpartisan commission. I've heard the proposal that a nonpartisan commission should be set up to do the districting.
Yeah, I think the chances of that are below 5% of that.
You haven't seen any.
Well, there's talk about it, but I think the likelihood of that happening is not very high.
You
Good, ma'am.
Good morning. I'm Gabby
Hi.
Seagard. I just have a quick question. I'm
Sure.
curious as to where you went to school, like, for college in New York.
You want me to talk about where I went to
No,
school?
no, I'm just curious as to where you went.
I went to Hamilton College in upstate New York, which was a small liberal arts college about an hour south of Syracuse, New York.
That's cool.
Such a liberal arts school that there were no majors like journalism. That's too specific. That's too professional. It was all things like English and math and science. I mean, it was very broad majors.
Do you know if it was close to New Paltz or Purchase, either of those schools?
Those were further south.
Further south.
And then to graduate school at Northwestern University in Chicago.
Nice. Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, my
Hi.
name is Kendall.
Hi.
I guess I wanted to ask you, after grad school, how did you end up at Texas Monthly, and what was your experience like?
It's a great question. So I read Texas Monthly in graduate school. I'd never been to Texas. But it had a reputation as being one of the only magazines that took long-form journalism, narrative, nonfiction, storytelling seriously. And I was a big reader of The New Yorker and of Sports Illustrated and of other magazines that did long-form journalism. And so I read Texas Monthly because I was told, well, if you like those magazines, you're probably going to like this one. And even though I didn't really know Texas or many of the people being written about or many of the stories being told, I thought it was incredibly well done. And so decided I'd love to work at this magazine someday. And it really just took a couple of years. You know, in the old days, nobody would leave. They'd come to work for Texas Monthly and they'd stay forever. It's a little bit different today, but it's not all that different. But it just took a while for there to be a job that opened up. And I eventually was able to find out about a job that was available in 1991 and wrote to the editor and asked to be considered, and was very fortunate to get a job. And the problem, in quotes, is that once you get in there, you don't want to leave. And I stayed there almost 18 years. It's great.
So your experience there, so how do you, I guess, you became editor-in-chief, correct?
I was a senior editor when I came to work there at the end of '91. I stayed as senior editor for a year. I was made deputy editor in early '93. I was deputy editor, which was the #2 job on the editorial side of the magazine from '93 to 2000. And the editor who I worked for retired, and I was made the editor in July of 2000. In September of 2008, the founder of the magazine, who had also been the publisher for 36 years, himself finally retired and asked me to take over the company. And so I became the president, not the publisher, and I made somebody who was the associate publisher, the publisher instantly. She's now, and has been for the last 4 years, working for the Tribune. But I was then president of the company, editor-in-chief, and I had been grooming somebody to be the editor of the magazine at whatever point that I decided to leave. His name was Jake Silverstein. He, within the last 6 months, has gone off to be the editor of the New York Times Sunday magazine. And Brian Sweeney, who was started out as my intern back in 1996 and was an editor at the magazine for many years and worked as Jake's deputy, then just became the editor of the magazine over the summer.
Thank you.
Sure.
Last question from the audience.
Hi.
Hello, I'm Megan Calvino, public relations student.
Yes.
You stated that it was important to participate in the election of our congressional representatives. You later maintained and outright stated that it was largely irrelevant who we vote for
Right.
because, as you said, the
Right.
show is rigged.
Yeah.
How do you propose we solve the problem of voter apathy and its cycle that ties into irrelevance?
Well, I think those things are actually not as much in conflict as you might imagine. On the one hand, I think it's crucial that you vote, not just, by the way, for members of Congress, but for members of the state legislature and for statewide elected officials and for everybody on the ballot, top to bottom. While I believe that as the current system is constructed, redistricting makes it so that elections are not competitive and there's a disincentive for people to vote because they feel like, why would my vote count? The outcome of the election is already known. If I get to a general election and I live in a district that is so heavily weighted toward one party, if I vote for that party's already going to win. If I vote against that party, in all likelihood, my vote's not going to matter. The way that they've constructed the district, the outcome is already known. You don't really have much of an incentive to vote. You might be forgiven for saying, why would I bother to vote? My vote doesn't matter. At the end of the day, if that's the attitude that everybody in the state has, well, it's understandable. Nothing ever changes. The only way that things change is for people to turn out to vote. If you don't like the way things are going in the state, you have an opportunity to register your protest by voting and by trying to find other people like you in your community and outside your community to cast a similar protest vote, and then maybe things change. If you all give up, not just you personally, but if anybody gives up on the possibility of changing, the only thing I can assure you will happen is that nothing will change. Now, people think population change in the state is going to be the thing that will swing the pendulum back. I have Democratic friends around the state who say, you know what? On almost every issue, the Latino community is aligned with the Democratic Party. And so even if these are bad times for Democrats in the state of Texas now, if we just wait until Latinos are in the majority, everything will be fine. You know, the Latino community is no more monolithic on issues than the Anglo community or the African American community. It really depends upon the candidate. It depends upon the moment. Things will never change in any community or in any state if you don't vote. And that's, I mean, so as much as I acknowledge that the system as it's currently constructed disincentivizes voting, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't vote. It means that the situation we're in right now is not the best situation we could ask for from the standpoint of how our democracy functions. On that up note, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.